All right, looks like we're online here. We're going to give a little bit of time for everyone to get through the technology of getting into our webinar. But we see the numbers climbing quickly here, so excited to get a chance to talk to everyone in just a minute. All right. And I think we'll officially sort of kick off, even if people are joining in the next, 1 minute, so that for people's schedules that we don't have a chance of running long, and that we get a chance to also get to people's questions. Great. I'm glad we got such a good attendee list here. That's great. All right. I hope everyone's enjoying the fall weather.
Had some beautiful blue skies here in the Atlanta area of late.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a drought, but it's been really great. And we're hosting some out-of-town people this week, so we're excited to show off how great our city looks in the fall. It'll be great. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, even though there's some more people still joining. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning, afternoon, wherever you're joining from, for attending this webinar. We're really excited to share this with you. Just a few housekeeping things. We think this will be about 40-45 minutes for the webinar, maybe a little less. There'll be a 10-minute Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions, if you could just type them into the Q&A box there and go to webinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end or as we go, depending on our ability to stare at two screens at once. So most importantly, I know you're here to hear about Michael. I am Daniel Graff Radford, the CEO of Voxco, and I think that it'd be great if Michael, if you could give an introduction about yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you. Really pleased to be speaking here with you, Daniel. So I'm Michael Link. Spent about 35 years here in the market research and social science survey research area. Spent a decade at Nielsen, was recently chief research officer at Ipsos. I've also worked at some of the larger government contractors, Research Triangle Institute, Apt Associates, did a small stint at the Centers for Disease Control as well. My focus has been over the years really on kind of what's next in the survey research field. What are those new technologies, the new things that are taking place that allow us to be able to, with more confidence or quicker or even more complexity, be able to capture attitudes, behaviors, opinions, market segments, those types of things. So of course, speaking here about artificial intelligence and the role that it is now playing in survey research, and sharing some of the observations, Danny, with you is I think a really fruitful for everybody here.
Absolutely. And one housekeeping note, thanks, Simon. The recording for this webinar will be sent out to everyone afterwards, so you don't have to take notes as we go. You can listen to it afterwards if need be. So how did we get here? Over the last 2 years, I've met with hundreds of companies, and it's funny how the time to talk to AI has gone from a few minutes into the conversation to sometimes just a few seconds into the conversation. It's top of mind for researchers. It's top of mind for people thinking about what it means to their job, what it means to our industry. And we have gathered a lot of lessons learned and successes. And through that journey of trying to bring this together into a framework that is usable for everybody, it led us to Michael. And so we're going to take you through some of those lessons, some of those opportunities for improvement, and some of those great opportunities for growth. and also some of the vulnerabilities and so forth, and how we've built this framework, and we'll provide it to you guys afterwards as well. All right.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Andy. So that stat that we had listed up there, I think really raises one of the kind of critical things for me. It's one of those things that's highlighting what's not being asked. Because these days, the critical question really isn't what AI platform should I get or what set of experiments should we be running. It's really what framework do we have that we're operating from. A lot of folks are using AI and putting things now into production. And obviously, when we get to the production stage of using these types of things, we really need to make sure at the end of the day that what we're producing is what it is that we're hoping that we're producing. So that's hence what Daniel and I really want to focus on here is that higher level. What is it that we do as an industry? What is that we do as organizations or as individual researchers to put a framework that works around us for using AI? So we focused really on this kind of concept of responsible AI in survey research. And what does that really mean? Well, what it means is basically bringing all of those things that we have used and served us well for decades to the table when we're bringing AI into the mix of things. So for instance, validation. What is it, does it work? Does it actually work the way we think that it works? Transparency, how is this working behind the scenes? Reproducibility, I do something, can you run it basically the same way and get the same results? So these are the principles that from a market research perspective, from a survey reach perspective, over the decades in our industry, these have been the foundations that we've used to make sure that the data that we're putting out is accurate. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters here, right? These are AI, these things are all tools that we can use. But at the end of the day, what we're all here for is to figure out how can we make sure that the information we're putting out there is valid, reliable, that we can stand behind it, that we trust it. Regardless of what industry it is, that's at the end of the day what we're trying to do. So let's focus a bit here then on AI. And if you've been in the market research or survey industry for any length of time or read anything about the history, you know that one of the reasons I became a methodologist is because it's a dynamic environment. It's always changing. Every time there's been major changes in technologies, whether it was more than 50 years ago, the introduction in 1971 of computer-assisted telephone interviewing that just really revolutionized things, to moving things online where we could actually then have respondents doing their own surveys, to then moving to mobile devices. There've been just a whole array of things that have taken place in our industry, and AI is one of those. Let me be clear on my stance of AI. I'm a super proponent of this, but again, as a survey researcher, as a methodologist, is somebody that's been a leader in major companies that has to produce these things and put results out, whether we're giving them to the media or we're trying to find market share or we're letting the Centers for Disease Control understand how vaccines work. Regardless of what you're in, we want to make sure that at the end of the day that we're using AI responsibly to give us the types of results that we want. So how do we build this framework? Let me take 1 second, because I know that there's some folks that have been on the AI train, so to speak, for the last decade or two. Yes, artificial intelligence has been around for quite a long time, and things like machine learning, natural language processing have been part of our lexicon and marketing and research for quite a while. Generative AI is the new one to the ballgame. So let me back up for just a second, just to make sure everybody's understands what we're talking about here. So artificial intelligence really is that broad umbrella, that ability to take it's a number of various different techniques that are out there. And I like to think of this sometimes as a family of techniques. And we have 2 siblings that are out there. The first sibling is more that deterministic, predictable sibling that we have out there. And these are the types of techniques that we have been using. They're more rule-based types of systems, natural language processing, machine learning. These are things where, again, you train an algorithm, you develop an algorithm, but once you set it, just like any algorithm we've done in the past, when you put input in, and you get output. If you put that same input in the next day, you should get the same output. So it's deterministic. It's again, that sibling that's predictable, they're repeatable. They're the rule follower of the family, so to speak. Then we've got the creative sibling, and that's the younger sibling. That's the new one. So that's generative AI. Generative AI is creative, but it's more unpredictable. And it's made to be that way. It is developed so that it tries to mimic human thinking, human behavior, human imagination. So it's moving beyond just simply automating rule-based types of things to actually being able to create. And again, used well, this is a fantastic tool. But you can imagine that something that isn't quite as predictable it starts to raise some yellow flags in our type of industry where we've been used to leveraging tools that give us that better, more of that predictability. So again, AI overall is that larger family. You've got one sibling that's more of those deterministic, the rule follower. You've got more of the creative, artistic, generative AI, and it's generative AI, that second sibling, that Daniel and I are talking about really for the rest of the presentation here. And let's delve into that a bit, because generative AI brings with it, all AI brings with it some of these issues. But when we've got the kind of the first set, we've learned how to be able to have more confidence in the natural language processing, document those types of things. The question becomes, with the use of generative AI, how are we to develop a framework that basically lets this set of tools be creative in the way that we want them to, but creates a framework so they stay on the path ultimately that we would like them to be on. So, there are three basic areas here where this type of AI has vulnerabilities that we need to be aware of and we need to address in any system, whether it's something you purchase or something you build yourself. These are things that are out there that I think we really drive us to needing a framework. First and foremost is just that transparency. Daniel and I called this webinar the black box, and it is the black box for that very reason. With generative AI, you can put in, what you put in prompts, what you get on the other end typically, but what you don't know is what happens in between. And quite frankly, kind of the scary part, perhaps for you and I as researchers, as market researchers and others, is that even the folks that develop these models don't exactly know 100% what's happening in between there as well, but they seem to work. So that really raises a red flag for us, because one of the key things that we have is that ability to be transparent in what we do, to document what we do. Ultimately, so again, if I do something and get a result, I can give my set of approaches to you. I can give the data to you. You can run them the same way and hopefully get that same result. That's basically what all of our industry has been built on, that ability to trust each other, have reproducibility, and understand what the data is. The second area, and we hear a lot more about this one, is more of this focus on bias. And generative AI didn't invent bias. It actually comes by it very naturally. As most of us probably know, these large language models that drive this type of generative AI are built on essentially all of our human knowledge that's been able to glean. Everything from the internet, everything from books, those things all come with human biases. Then there are just kind of the mechanical, mathematical biases that we have. Models drift. Models don't always stay the same when they're set up in this particular way. So again, bias isn't intentional, but it's inevitable. There's going to be some level of bias in there. Privacy is a huge issue here, because when you feed things into generative AI, it's more than likely going to live somewhere forever and ever somewhere else. So, we deal a lot with publicly identifiable information, with private types of information. How is it that we can make sure that we're safeguarding the information that we put in, that it's not being held in these systems, that it's not accessible from others. And then compliance, and I'll just be totally honest, the laws are slow to catch up to a lot of these things, and they're very slow to catch up, particularly as these technologies move forward. So it's really much more incumbent upon us to be able to, from the ethical standpoints, from having sets of rules that we want to follow when we're developing these types of techniques and using them. The third area of vulnerability really has to do kind of with this control and organizational readiness. And it gets back to that original quote about the fact that a lot of folks, majority of the folks, are starting to really use generative AI. But reality, very few of them go back and have guardrails. Very few of them have any type of organizational framework that they've sat down and talked about how is it that we should use this? How should we use it responsibly? I mean, AI doesn't go off the rails because of bad code. It goes off the rails because there's nobody steering it. There's no expert, no human in the loop sometimes, and that becomes a real issue for us. So again, speed without structure really just equates to risk. So these are, just three of the kind of the big three buckets of things that are out there. And I'm sure as we have discussions, we could delve into other types of vulnerabilities that you're seeing or experiencing. But we want to get you involved here for just a second and find out which of these particular areas are you most concerned about in your organization?
So we're going to run this poll. Just pick whatever item you think is most important.
We'll give it just a second. So Daniel, when you're out speaking, I know you're going to talk a bit more about this. Which of these are you hearing most about from individuals?
I really like your concept of the two siblings. And, when we were dealing with having very deterministic AI through machine learning and so forth, the answer was there or the answer was not there. It was very obvious. And with generative AI, it's almost this desire for it to give an answer, and that answer can look good, that ends up, being something that is troublesome for researchers, right? And I would tell you that we find that the transparency and reproducibility is easily testable, and that it should be part of your framework. And we'll get into that in just a minute here, that if you see an answer within the AI generated response, how do you track that back to the core research and see that that is grounded in data? And we would call that ground truth. The bias we've all seen on the news, how, for instance, when not to pick on one LLM, but all of them, there was news about how ChatGPT was giving very positive responses. That can make people feel good about talking to ChatGPT, but isn't great for those of us doing research. And here we go. The bias is the clear winner here, followed by transparency, reproducibility, and then organizational control and readiness. The control and readiness is probably the least thought through of the three today, where everyone's trying something, but how do you create a cohesive use case for AI within your company? And that's something we're going to get into as well, that I think they're all important, but I think people have started at that first one, have seen that second one, and we're going to deal with all three on this framework.
Excellent. So Daniel, can you see I just want to make sure I've got my full screen up. So
yes, we're back.
Okay, we're back. All right. So yeah, one last thing before I turn it over to Daniel for more deeper insights into what he's been seeing and hearing is, okay, yeah, Michael, Daniel, you guys have talked about, what AI is, what some of the vulnerabilities, particularly for generative AI, and you talk about a framework. What exactly do you mean? So let's talk a bit about that. There is a blog that's on the Voxco website that we wrote on, and it is entitled The Black Box, and encourage you to read that. It's got a bit more detail in some of the factors. We've taken these and kind of distilled them into what we think are the three biggest things that we all need to focus on when we're developing a framework, whether it's within an organization or just within your unit, or even just as an individual researcher, kind of the way you're going to think about the use of tools. First and foremost is researcher in the loop. And what we mean by this is that the human always does need to be in charge, regardless of whatever the the pomp and circumstance and hype is. We as experts need to be in charge of what's going on. And I get, a very simple thing. I've been using probably like a lot of you, some of these models to do just basic writing. And I find it more than a bit disturbing sometimes when I will upload something that I directly upload and said, can you edit this? And it'll give me something. And I will look back in my paper and say, well, I can't find that particular paragraph. And it'll say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Even some of the simple things are sometimes a bit mysterious with what's happening with AI. On the other hand, I use it 90% of the time and get, super fantastic results. Really a helpful, I always think of it as more of a graduate student, a very good graduate student, where I have to make sure that I'm giving them the instructions up front, sometimes very detailed instructions. I'm checking the work at the end, correcting the work, but I'm never out of the loop. It might do some of the heavy lifting in between, but we need to make sure that the researcher is always in the loop on that front. And so basically, we're not looking at this at all as AI replacing researchers, again, despite the hype. It really is, particularly for our industry, the thing where the expertise and the tool really need to go together, and that human needs to keep their hands on the wheel. I mean, think of it like autopilot in an airplane, right? I mean, it can do a lot while you're flying, but you want to make sure that there's a trained pilot somewhere in the system here that can take over when things are needed, that are verifying, takeoff and landing. That's exactly what we mean by the researcher in the loop. The second piece then becomes this accountable AI. And this is, again, where we get back to documentation. We're not ever going to know what's happening inside the black box in any great detail. That's just not going to happen, certainly not anytime soon. But what we can do is know what are the prompts we're putting in up front. We can keep those, log those. We can know on the back end what's happening. We can start to do various types of testing as well. So I think, again, documentation is something we've always done with methodology. Some do it better than others, but basically we want to be able to write that cookbook and hand it to a client or keep it for ourselves that says, here's how we got there. These are the steps we took to produce these results that we're now talking about externally. And so that's what we really mean by being accountable. And one of the things that we'll give everyone here at the end is a checklist. And I think Daniel mentioned this up front, that we've put together that at least as a start, and we'd love to have feedback from you all on this, about some of these things that we can and should be doing to get to this level of accountability. And last but not least then is proof of performance. We need to be able to make sure that, whatever tools that we're using or systems that we're using actually work. I mean, we do this all the time, right? We test questionnaires. We need to make sure that we're testing the AI models and the AI platforms that we're using as well. So these involve, again, a lot of the things that we've always done in the past. Testing of subgroups. Does it seem to be working better for one or the other? Are we seeing some subgroup numbers drift over time? Is that a real drift? Is that really happening? That attitude, that behavior changing with that group? Or is it something that's happening in the algorithm or the tool? That's something we need to make sure we're aware of. Benchmark data sets. Again, these are things that we use all the time. Sometimes, particularly if you're doing things over time, you'll use those as benchmarks. If suddenly you get a result that's way out of whack, you start to ask yourself, okay, well, maybe something in society changed and that market segment changed. Oftentimes, though, it might be, oh no, Joe tweaked the algorithm somewhere and that actually is what caused this. So having benchmarks and being able to, on the back end, validate that, okay, what we're seeing, does that make sense? And then last but not least, again, these reports that we're putting together, doing periodic reviews of what's happening, periodic testing, split sample testing, to make sure that these tools that we are using are working in a way that we really hope that they'll be able to work. So basically, If you just take those three things as the start of a framework, and again, there's a whole lot we could put in there, whole lot of depth within each of these, but that starts to give us this concept that we can start to use to make sure that we're using and employing survey research in a much more accountable way. And on that front, then, let me shift from this kind of high level discussion more to the nuts and bolts of what it is that's happening out in the field, and turn it over to Daniel to talk about some of the things he's seeing, hearing, and thinking on that front. Daniel?
Yeah, so, some of the market perspectives that we're seeing, I'll tell you one story to start, which is that we were meeting with one of the world's largest market research firms, and they were sharing with us their journey of starting to use generative AI. And one of the researchers that we were meeting with said that the positive bias they were finding in some of the off-the-shelf LLM use cases that they were using was starting to sway their customer data pretty significantly. And so what she developed with us was really the beginning of what became this RAP framework, is that we were able to show the percentage of her data that was getting utilized in the reporting that we had, and then showing the traceability of especially some of that sentiment that she was noticing, that it was actually tracing to those exact comments as opposed to something being generated. And then lastly, that we were able to come up with some common data sets that we were able to run each iteration of the model on to see if it was drifting. And so, I think that that's an easy kind of quick use case that was helpful in being able to do some validation. And, every time there's an upgrade, every time there's a change, she's looking for that. On top of that, through that conversation and hundreds of others, we've had to develop our philosophy of AI that, we're going to get to in just a second here. But what we want to talk about is that, we think that a lot of the communication and conversation about AI has been about all the cost savings and jobs it's going to come for. And I do think that, when we have machines doing work, that is something that is possible. But I want you to imagine, a world of abundance with AI, and, specifically, what we're seeing is the ability to give people AI superpowers. We are, users of AI internally for our coding use case, and we've seen some of our best engineers become superheroes of engineers and what they can get done. And I aspire to be the worst software programmer in my company. If that's an untrue statement, I'm in the wrong place. And the truth of it is that when I use something like Claude Code, I do become better. But I don't have the decades of experience of a really top-notch engineer. And when they use Claude Code, they become a true superhero of coding. This is the model that we are really building towards within research. We want those researchers that know what really good research looks like to gain AI superpowers. This is not about us taking away jobs. This is much more about, imagine what the world would look like if we had you guys with AI superpowers answering questions on behalf of your clients and on behalf of the brands and customers and different types of research that you're working on. We could imagine, as economists have, that the world's GDP has the potential to go from 10 trillion to 11 trillion over the next few years with AI. But for that to happen, it's not going to be just through cost savings. If you're able to generate way better insights and way more insights for your customers, in this same time period, they'll make better decisions. Product launches will go better. Polling will become clearer. Our understanding of how people feel and the empathy that you have for your customers will be so tight that you'll be able to make better and better decisions. Those better decisions lead to better economic outcomes. And so by taking away the tasks that you find tedious and allowing you to have your questions answered and do with the same budgets, 10x in some cases or 30% more in other cases, we are seeing that that will be a much better world to live in. And I think that that will be the winning use cases of AI, is how much more can we know as researchers? How can we more quickly answer our curiosity with those? And going on to the next one, to just give you a very specific example, one of our customers, market research firm, was able to win work with Nike to deliver insights across 80 psychological dimensions in a matter of weeks, and it covered 20 of their competitors. This work was literally unaffordable for even a massive company like Nike without using AI. And the amount of man hours and time it would have taken to deliver that work, the actual data would have been useless at the end of it. And so the insights and the ability for top brands or early brands or for researchers of any stripe or type to make decisions in quicker time periods and affect change for the people that they're looking to help with that research is really dramatic. And so when we use it in these ways, we'll win more work, we'll be able to answer more questions, and we'll get way better outcomes, whether those are economic or qualitative or whatever they are. And we would love to hear from you guys which of these things are, oh wait, I'm a little ahead on that one, sorry. What we want to talk about here are kind of what we're calling the North Star for responsible AI. First of all, on the transparency side, can you trace back what you're getting from the AI to your core data that you have been receiving so that you can really explain it? Does it stand up? And can you see how that traceability works? On the next piece, can you test for bias? That's sort of related to that. And on top of that, does your provider use your data in ways that you're uncomfortable with? Do they publish how they use your data? You can use the latest and greatest off-the-shelf LLMs and not have it train those LLMs. It can't be hosted by those LLMs. It has to be hosted separately. You have to have certain security controls in place. It can be in the cloud, but it has to be within a private cloud. And so you need to see that these data protections are properly set up. You might want it to train your use case of the AI, but not train others. And so that might be a use case that you're okay with. And is that something that you can select or not select with your customers? I want you guys to also think a little bit on the control side before we do the poll. And very, very specifically is that, are you guys all using AI differently, and how does the use case of this data feed each other's work? And are you taking in AI generated data from other researchers that is affecting your work, and do they have the same controls as you? So what we would love to hear are, where do you see the most value? And so take a minute to read these things on what your choices are. And we're going to put up the poll now for where you think you get the most value out of AI. And if any of these things are unclear, I'll just give a quick explanation. Using AI to generate a survey using your data and your history and your preferences, an AI chatbot actually helping you give the interview, whether that is on your shoulder or taking your survey and giving it, being able to give much more thorough real-time sentiment analysis of that data. Do you want synthetic agents giving the surveys? And then what does AI-powered sample do to speed up your time to test or to be able to get quality of responses? So we're very curious what you guys think on any of these things. Michael, anything you'd want to add to these capabilities?
Well, just a bit of interesting background because I was remembering just to show how long some of this has been around. In the mid 1990s, a set of engineers and I actually got a National Science Foundation grant to try to do the fourth one there, which was AI voice interviewing. And we were going to use it more for training telephone interviewers. As we probably remember your history in the 1990s or so, caddy telephone interviewing was huge, and how could you train large numbers of folks? And we were trying to use natural language processing. You couldn't, the technology obviously just wasn't there at the time. But again, it's interesting to see some of these ideas come back. And again, I think with the concept of chatbots, applying those to AI, we're seeing those kinds of things. You mentioned, and we don't even have it on here, the coding ability. Yeah, there's just so many avenues here where AI can really, if we use it right, can really help us to take survey and market research to the next level.
And so, the two top picks here were survey creation and sentiment analysis. Those are two of the ones that we're, participating in as a company, and we see that people are really generating a lot of value today. And so not a surprise that you guys picked those. And if anyone hasn't tried these types of technologies, they're a lot of fun to play with, and also to save time and get you a ton of great data for your research. All right.
So Daniel, since I have my screen in presentation mode, unfortunately, I can't see the questions. So I might need to rely on you to see if you can see those.
So if you guys want to post any questions to us, Simon will assign those questions to me, and then we will be able to answer them. So the first one is, how can AI be used to improve call center monitoring and operations? Do you want me to take that as a starting point, or would you like to take it?
Oh, you can take it and I can add in. That's fine.
Okay, great. So what we're seeing is this already moved. All right, so what we're seeing is this survey creation can be very, very helpful. We're also seeing ways that you can take the audio file from, so the survey creation is coming out this month if you're a Voxco customer, but the audio file being turned into through on an open-end basis, being sent through, for instance, our Scribe AI, to be able to quickly transcribe and to code it very quickly and get sentiment analysis has been one thing there. Anything you want to add to that one, Michael?
Yeah, so this is an area that there's a lot of development work, I think, particularly on the market research side, where, again, gaining quality control over large number, particularly when you have large call centers, is often very difficult with the manual techniques that we end up using. And so, again, there's a lot of rules, regulations here, getting permission to record up front. But if you can record the interviews, then you can have prompts that you develop and systems that you develop that can go through and essentially code and evaluate the interaction. And so, you can look at how the language individuals use, the tone that they use, the turn of the conversations, and it can be a fantastic tool, I think, for training, retraining interviewers, showing them exactly the kinds of things that can happen. So that is very, very feasible. I think that the hurdle there is more from the standpoint, the legal standpoint of making sure that wherever you're at, there are different laws for recording, making sure that the respondent is okay with that, as well as the interviewer. And but then also you get some of these technical challenges. So that's a lot of data that winds up being captured, and that can be purged. There's ways to get around that. But I think that's a really interesting avenue, because it's essentially taking not just sentiment analysis, but a lot of the linguistic type of work that has been done more manually, and being able to automate that and then produce reports that can be auto-generated immediately after an interview is finished, or at the end of the shift, or by the next shift, so you can train and retrain folks.
I think that's a great use case. I really like this question here. We've talked a lot about trust being the foundation of responsible AI, do you see transparency and documentation becoming a real differentiator in the research space? And if so, how is that shaping what clients expect from their partners?
So on that front, it's interesting because depending on which industry you come from, the use of documentation has either been very thin or it has been very, very extensive. But I think typically most clients are going to, regardless of who they are going to want some level of documentation. They always have for what we've done. But I do see the need to document the prompts that you're using, the tools that you're using, even getting down because the versions of the various platforms are changing, GPT-4, GPT-5. These are all pieces of information that, again, I think if you really think it through, as an organization, decide which of these pieces are you going to capture, you really can market that as a differentiator, particularly, again, because clients vary in their savviness on this. Sometimes a client doesn't care at all, where you just give me the results and I'll trust you. But most clients I find really want to understand, okay, what is it that you do? How did you get this result? Particularly, you're going to want these types of documentation when you start to have results that perhaps are counterintuitive or different than what a client or the public or the news media is expecting. You want to be able to show that those results are real and you can stand behind them, that you're actually capturing something significant, not just that the tools that you used are the things that are creating those results. So I definitely think that documentation, and again, it's more of a habit than anything else. These pieces of information are out there, easily accessible, and we just need to start doing that.
I think that's really great. We're getting tons of great questions. We'll see if we can get to all of them. This is an interesting one we've all been thinking about. Should we entertain AI-generated respondents to replace humans? Really curious what you think. I've got some thoughts here.
Yeah, I'll take it first. So a lot of folks will refer to that as synthetic respondents, right? Or that's typically the term that's out there. It is already happening, particularly in certain segments of market research. Certainly academics and others are testing these types of things. I'll be completely honest, in one of my the recent roles, that was something that I was really interested in looking at, particularly the aspect of combining some level of real data that you're getting from real humans with that ability then to create synthetic data. We've always used imputation to fill in gaps. Somebody's missing on a couple different questions, and we use their characteristics to be able to impute or guess, basically best guess scientifically of what that was. So we've always kind of filled in data sets that way. This synthetic data set is really taking it the next level, and it's not just imputing, but now you could ask ChatGPT, you can give it a profile. I am a Hispanic woman that lives in Southern California that works, basically, and then say, how would that individual answer X, Y, and Z question? And again, that's the way you kind of start to do it. And then you would combine that with some of the benchmark data that you have that are collected from real individuals. And the power that I see is that ability to really delve deeper into particular subgroups that we have difficulty reaching right now because there's just not enough of them. We can gain better insight. Smaller geographic areas, again, where it's difficult to do. I know some folks are interested in it just because it might be quicker, faster, and cheaper. That's great so long as, again, you're validating, you have confidence in what it is that you're producing. But I think there's a wide range of uses for synthetic data, and it's already here. People are already starting to use it, so it's not a hypothetical.
I remember over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago, hearing about it at first, and my knee-jerk reaction was, this is a terrible idea, because all the things we've talked about with bias in terms of giving positive answers, in terms of the drift from what is useful data, and in terms of how generative AI just wants to give an answer. And given the level of attention that's being paid to this space, I've started to see some interesting initial use cases. kind of what you're saying here, where you can create a profile and test it against real data and start to see what that level of drift is. I think we're early in those days. I don't know that anyone's doing that really well yet. Love to be wrong. Please send us examples. Then the second is just that sort of quick reaction. You know, a marketing department really wants a quick understanding of what a certain demographic would think is good. And then the last one that I've seen actually kind of use in a useful way is what I think is kind of known as more of the test of the test. So before you give a survey out, you could have sort of role play with this fake profile, if you will, and start to see how your questions are going to resonate before you spend a lot of money and go big on a paid for sample. And so I think we'll see what ends up being the actual use case, and maybe even very soon with the speed of AI. I don't really know. Here is the next one. Great overview, thanks. Thank you. Oh, it moved again. Can we expect AI to be used for improving survey questions, ergo suggesting alternative wording as a standard feature at some point? Will this be done with transformer models or some other approach? I'll take a first stab at that, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say, Michael. So, you know, this month, please check out our AI survey creation tool, where you can input like a Word document with your idea of survey questions, and it will output a potential survey for you to deliver using Voxco. But I think that what you should really also think about is how this can, during an interview, especially if it's qualitative, almost be that, you know, helpful. I kind of liked what you said, grad student, kind of leaning over your shoulder, whispering ideas to you as you're giving an interview. And I think that there are some of those features available that can help to enrich the quality of a survey. Michael, anything that you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say this is the sweet spot. In fact, I was surprised that this wasn't one of the first things that's been developed and used very broadly. Because if you think about it, it is the sweet spot for AI. You know, just doing editing and giving you, you know, how are 5 different ways I might say this paragraph? How might I reword this email? Those are the kind of things it's being used for all the time. And that's actually what it's really good for, right? Because there's no exact right or wrong answer. The nice thing about about developing survey questions is we have 2 things that help. One is we've got a huge body of rules, right? Over the years, we have developed through testing and publishing everything. We know what the characteristics of a good and a bad survey question are. And so we can develop our prompts, yeah, that allow us to build those rules in and say, follow these rules. Just like you would tell it, follow this editorial guideline when editing this report, you would tell it, here are the rules for good survey questions. And then we also have huge banks of questions that have already been used and validated. And so you take those 2 things and you start saying, okay, give me 3 questions on the environment. No, give me 3 different ways of asking about this particular viewpoint. That I think is where things are really good. But again, it gets back to the human in the loop, right? You at the end of the day want to make sure that whoever is finalizing the questionnaire and certainly putting the inputs in up front knows what they're doing, so that you do have that human review at the end. But yes, I think that's a huge area for all of us.
So I know we're over the 45 minutes. We're going to take one more question. Anything that you guys have sent as questions, please reach out. We would love to spend some time and talk to you guys some more. Also, we're going to be sending you the AI checklist, and we would love to talk to you further about any of your thoughts on our framework and also what you're seeing in AI. So please reach out. But here is the last question, and I hope you can take it first, and then I'll share as well. Looking ahead, where do you see the next major inflection point for AI in survey research? And what questions should we as professionals be asking now to make sure that we're really ready for that change?
So I do think we've touched on this already, which is that synthetic respondent. Just about everything else that we've talked about have been tools for helping us to reach our actual respondents better, or to develop questionnaires, or to back end code. I do think that next frontier really is what happens with synthetic respondents? What happens to the folks when certain parts of the industry want to push to have simply all synthetic with no benchmark? I think that's a wide open area. Again, it's an avenue that there's a lot of testing going on, but that I think is where things like framework become really, really essential for all of us, because that will, again, fundamentally change the game.
I love that answer, Michael. I'm going to give a little bit of a different answer. So I think that what Michael's saying is right in front of us. But I love, I'm going to misquote, I believe it was an MIT economist, but it could have been a different economist, that was doing some research about major changes in the world with advents of new technology. So looking at electricity, then looking at the computer, then looking at the internet, and now looking at AI. And what was found was there were some initial productivity gains with each of those major changes, but when things really changed is when that technology became how the process was built, was centered in how the process was built. For example, with electricity, people continue to use pulley style systems in factories with electricity sort of around the edges for things like lights. But until new factories were built with electricity at the center, that there were only modest gains in productivity. And then when it was at the center, massive gains. Similarly, when computers came out, it was done to sort of help on processes that already existed. And then as companies were sort of built with computers at the center, productivity gains became massive. We can say the same thing about internet. And so as researchers, if we think about an AI-centered research effort that we do, what does that look like? How does the factory of research at an AI-centered space look in the future, as opposed to just a staff augmentation or something helping on the edges? And I think that's when we're going to see really massive changes. And so asking yourself that question could be helpful, and asking Michael that question in the future as these technology changes continue to occur. We're really grateful. We had really great attendance here. We can't wait to interact with you guys after this. Michael, thank you so much for bringing your
My pleasure, my friend.
experience. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.